All right, YouTube family, welcome into A Moment with the Author. I am Kelly R. Jackson, and this is our third video in our series, A Moment with the Author, where what I'm going to be doing is I'm going to be taking time and taking 10 videos and discussing each of the 10 books that I've written and the significance of those books, the backstory, if you will, some of the inspiration or whatever it is that caused for me to write this book. And so we're into book number 3, my third book, third published book, and I am a self-published author, so I don't have a publisher. I publish myself. We are into the third book now. We've done the first 2 books, Temporarily Disconnected, Seeds from the Blue Book, which is my book of poetry. And so now we are into book number 3. This book here is called Peace in My Mind. Peace in My Mind, a journey to find ourselves while embracing who we are. And I told you all in the last video that this book is going to be, this is going to be an interesting video. This is going to be a interesting clip that we do here, because this book is very significant, not just in my writing career, but just in my life in general. So we're going to discuss, as we do, we try to do 3 or 4 questions. We got 3 questions for this book, Peace in My Mind. So this particular book, again, this is my third book. This book I released in 2009, and so this is the third book out of 10. So let me get right into it and talk about, and I'm going to share something very, just hit my mind here. I'm going to share something very special with you at the end of these 3 questions. So let's get right into it. Peace in My Mind. First question I have is, what is the significance of the title? What is the significance of the title? Well, just to show a little bit of my diversity, the title actually comes from a song that I knew by a rock group called the Black Crowes. And there's a line where he says, peace in my mind. And that's actually where the title of the book came from. It came from a song, Peace in My Mind. Now, the significance of the title beyond that, the journey to find ourselves while embracing who we are. If you read this book, if you have not read this book, we hope you go out and buy it. But if you read this book, there is 2 halves to this book. And there was a side of me that was very, let me just say, for lack of a better term, that was a worldly side of me. The side that you know, people refer to me by my initials, KJ. There was that side of me, and then there was that other side of me that was more spiritual, that was thinking, that was a little bit deeper. It wasn't about the surface. And so when I came up with the concept of this book, I decided in my creative mind to have both sides of myself write a book. And so that side of me that was very much in the world, if you will, and that other side of me that was a thinker, that was a philosopher, if you will, that was spiritual. And I decided to have both sides of those. This is my creativity work. And I said, both sides of you are going to write one book. And the first half of this book is going to deal with who you are, and let me say it like this, in your flesh. And the second half of this book is going to deal with who you are in your spirit. And so the significance of the title is that these 2 things are going on inside my head, these 2 sides of me that are inside of my head, and they're constantly doing battle, because that flesh side of me wants to do what it wants to do, but that spiritual side of me wants to say, slow down, we got to think about what we're doing, we can't just be out here any kind of way. And so the significance of the title was, again, we talked about embracing who we are while trying to find ourselves. And I had to come to a point where I embraced KJ, and I embraced that side of myself that was a little bit wild, that side of it would disobey your mother and all this other stuff. I had to learn to embrace that person, who I was, while trying to find who I was really supposed to be in life. And so I could not spend a lot of time denying that there was another side of me in there while searching for that person that I was supposed to be. And so that was the struggle right there. It's like, try to find yourself, sure, but you can't really find who you're supposed to be if you're not going to be honest about who you are right now. And so I had to come into it, and I had to say, well, you need to embrace who you are right now while you're trying to find who you are. So there was a significance of the title. And let me just talk about this for a second. There are things in the first half of this book, even as I wrote on the back of here in the notes, I talked about this split personality that I believe that we all have. All of us have at least 2 sides of ourselves. Some of us have a lot more. But there were things that I wrote in this book that dealt with a lot of things. I mean, I talked about dating. Strangely enough, the first chapter of the book is, Kelly, why aren't you married? Because at that time I was not married, and people would ask the question, why aren't you married? Why aren't you married? And so I decided to take it up in the book and say, why aren't you married? And I dealt with things like male-female relationships. I even touched on the Kobe Bryant situation when he went out to Colorado and got himself in trouble. There's a lot of interesting and things when I go back and I read it. There were actually funny things in this book as far as I was concerned, but it was broken up into two sides. The first few chapters of the book were said out with the old. And then the last half of the book, that spiritual person, says in with the new. That was the second half of the book. So I was being creative with it. So that is the significance of the title of the book. Trying to find peace in my own mind, trying to find myself while embracing who I actually was at the time. And again, I'm going to share some things at the end of this video that are significant to this book. Another reason why this book became so special to me. So question number 2, what is the significance of the book? What is the significance of the book? And it's interesting because when this book comes up, out of all of the books that I've written, strangely enough, this is the one I talk about the least. But this is the one I think that was most important in my development as a writer, in my development as a man. And it's strange to me that I don't talk about this book that often, but it's so significant. Now, let me say, the reason I don't talk about it, I think that I don't talk about it as much, is because of the first half of the book. It's lighthearted, in some places it's silly. It's supposed to be fun, and it's supposed to be all of that. And I felt like the second half of the book, as I matured, I fell in love more with the second half of the book. And I think I didn't talk about this book as much because I wanted to dismiss the first half of the book. But every time I think about writing, every time I think about how my writing has changed and progressed, and every time I think about who I am as a man now, I always go back to peace in my mind, because I literally was writing the change. I was literally writing out what was happening in my life, the transformation that was taking place. And so it's odd to me that I don't talk about this book more often, because it's so significant in my life. And when people say, what's your favorite book? I always tell them my first book, which was Temporarily Disconnected. But the most significant book is this book, because as far as I'm concerned, I was literally writing out what was happening in my life, the transformation that was taking place. And this book is so significant, not just in my life, but also in my ministry, because when I look at the second half of the book, I can actually see the preacher showing up in the book. I can see the preacher writing the second half of this book. And that's why this book is so significant to me, because it showed that change that was going on. And I don't know how many authors can actually say that. They literally saw their life changing inside one of their books. But it's interesting in that regard that it really was written by the old me and by the person that I really wanted to be and that I saw myself becoming. And that's why this book is so significant. That's why it's so powerful when I think back on it. On that second half of the book, I was like, it was really like it was written by a completely different person. And there are things in the second half of the book that talked about, there were things I talked about Hurricane Katrina, because this book came out around that time. I talked about the significance of 9/11, and really I took those American tragedies, if you will, and showed how things like that can change somebody's life, and it can change you, and it can show you what's really important in life when you lose everything. And that's why I think this book is so significant. But I really love the second half of this book, because it really is some of the best stuff that I've ever written. And so this book is significant in the fact that I saw my life change in this book. And for the life of me, again, I'll say this before I move on to question number 3. I don't know why I don't talk about this book more often, because it is so significant in my life. It really means so much to me, this book. I don't even know why it's not my favorite book when you consider all the things that I'm saying about it. But it really did represent a change in my life. And it really did, even in the pages of the book, I can see myself growing from this person that I used to be into the person that I wanted to be. And I'm still yet growing, but I saw it change right there in the book. Third question, and we're going to get out of here, how did your work change after this book? How did your work change after this book? After I finished this book, again, as I said at the end of the book, I can see the preacher showing up. And my work changed from the standpoint of at the end of this book, I haven't written anything like the first half of this book since then. I talked in the last video about poetry. I talked in the first book about Temporarily Disconnected and what that book was about and what it meant. And I've spoken on things like that, but I haven't written anything like that since then. It wasn't just the call in my life that I was accepting. I was accepting a different man. There was a different man that came out of the other end of this book. And that's reflected in my writing. And again, I am a minister, so a lot of the books that I write now are spiritual and they're based on the Word of God. But even in those pages, I could see the person that I was growing into that came out of the end of this book. And so this book was a transformation for me. This book really just, like I said, I wrote out the change in my life. And so my work changed after that because I was a different man. I was a completely different, and we're going to talk about that in the videos to come, but I was a different man after I finished this book. And that's how the work changed, because the work always reflected kind of where I was in my life, temporarily disconnected, scenes from the Blue Book and onto this book. After those first two books, it was like God was just shifting something in my life, and I was a different person on the other side of it. And so my work thus changed dramatically after I finished this book. Like I said, I did this book in 2009, and I came back in 2011. We'll talk about that in the next video with another book, but everything was different when I came back. And I'll explain, how that showed up in the next video. We deal with that next book. And so there it is, Peace in My Mind. Again, this is probably the most important book that I've written for myself, for my own changing and things like that. So this book was so transformative in my life. But let me share something before I get out of here that is so significant about this book. And I said, even after I pushed record on this video, it jumped in my mind the other significant parts of this book. The first thing I want to talk about is the fact that my mother actually wrote the foreword to this book. And I remember going to her and I said, "Ma, I need you to write something for me." And my mom is one of my biggest role models. And I told her, "I want you to write the foreword for my next book." And she was hesitant about doing it. And I said, "Ma, I really need you to do this." And my thought was, I want to be able to do a project with my mother before one of us leaves here. And I am able to say that my mother's words are in this book. And so it really is special to me in that regard that she wrote the foreword. She had to sit down and read the book first, but she wrote the foreword for this book, and that really is so significant to me. And I just wanted to be able to say that I did that. Second thing that is significant, and then I'm going to wrap this video up, is my niece, Olivia Pryor, my niece, she passed away in 2012. And there was something significant about this book, because as I wrote my first two books and I said I was done. I said I was done writing the book. If you saw the video on Scenes from the Blue Book, you know that I said that after those two books, I said I was going to write that first book and then write a book of poetry for my mom, and then I was retiring. And I wrote in this book how I said that to Olivia, and Olivia was highly intelligent and she loved to read. And I remember saying to Olivia, she said, "Uncle Kelly, when are you going to write another book?" And I said, "Uncle Kelly's done writing." And she said, "Uncle Kelly, you can't stop writing." She said, "We need writers. You have to keep writing." And I hadn't even given a thought to writing another book until she said, "You have to. You have to keep writing. We need writers." And I wrote that in this book, not knowing that we would lose Olivia 3 years after. And I wrote that in this book, that Olivia was the one that really pushed me to keep writing. She said, "You've got to keep writing because we need writers." And she said, "We don't have enough black writers. We need writers." And I put that in this book, and I remembered how excited she was to see her name, to see that I put that conversation in the introduction to this book. And so those are some things. And so when I look at this book, Peace in My Mind, it's very special for a ton of reasons, I think more so than any of the other books that I've written, is special to me personally and for the life of me. I cannot understand why I don't talk about it more, but I guess doing videos like this, I'm talking about it forever and ever. So there you have it, Peace in My Mind, the journey to find ourselves while embracing who we are. Listen, if you want to buy the book, you'll see the website pop up here. Again, visit the website, www.krjministries.org. If you want to purchase a copy of this book, again, I believe that it's some of my best work. It's a transformative work. It's an interesting work, and I am proud of it. And again, I got to do better about talking about it more. Listen, we're going to wrap this video up. We hope that you've enjoyed this moment with the author. As we always tell you, listen, if you like this video, please like it. Please share it on social media. Subscribe to our channel. We're trying to do some things different with the channel in 2018, and so we encourage you to subscribe to the channel. If you're so inclined, you can go by, you can order one of the books. I'll make sure I ship it right out to you. But we pray that you enjoyed this video. We'll come back with our next video, our fourth video book that we did call A Guide for Spiritual Living. There's some definitely interesting stories surrounding that book. So we appreciate you all joining us for this moment with the author, and we pray that you all will join us again next time. God bless you.